Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Cobern. In today's episode, we are talking about a, a review of the 2024 NFL Draft quarterback class. So, we're going to examine that class's performance based on data rankings after the draft that I submitted based on the data work that I've done on this channel. We're going to look at their performance compared to relative to past NFL prospects since the 1960s. So some of the data I have on NFL prospects goes back to the 1960s. And then we're also going to look at NFL data looking at their advanced passing statistics that go back to the 2018 NFL season. So we're going to look at a lot of information in this channel, but we're generally just going to do like sort of a report card on how all the quarterbacks have performed thus far after the 2024 NFL draft class. So let's get to it. So first off, the final draft rankings. So these were my final draft rankings, which I created from the data work that I've done. So taking a look at all of their, mobile quarterback scores, best quarterback scores, career quarterback scores, age, looking at their age-adjusted data, looking at their draft-adjusted data, because where you get drafted has an influence in terms of how successful you'll be, and in many cases, where you're drafted is everything to whether or not you're going to make it in the NFL or not, or at least be productive. It doesn't mean that it's automatically going to make you a Hall of Famer, but it is going to increase your chances for having a longer career than most when you're drafted higher. And based on those rankings, this is how everybody kind of panned out. Now, go to the glossary terms in the description below if all this stuff is not computing. But in terms of the DRM and the DRP, the DRM just looks at draft status measured against mobile quarterback ability, and then DRP looks at passing ability and draft status. And based on those areas, the top quarterbacks, at least in terms of how the data saw them, was Caleb Williams, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy. And then you had another tier with Jaden Daniels. And then you had another tier with Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, and Spencer Rattler. And then you had another tier that had Jordan Travis, followed by Michael Pratt, followed by Joe Milton and Devin Leary. So based on that information, the quarterbacks that had the chance to be like the best quarterbacks in this draft class were Caleb Williams, Drake May, and J.J. McCarthy. The quarterbacks that had a good chance of becoming sort of a Pro Bowler type quarterback, or like a really good quarterback, but not necessarily like a Hall of Famer, with Jaden Daniels. And then the tier below that, it's guys that are kind of like starters. Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler would be sort of in the category where they're closer to like maybe a starter. Probably Spencer Rattler would be on the lower end of that in terms of his ability. So I mean that's kind of how you should read the rankings. The averages are the averages, the thresholds are the thresholds. You're always going to have certain quarterbacks that are going to make it who don't really fit in any of these particular areas. But this is kind of how the data rankings went. So let's start with the first guy. So let's start with Caleb Williams, right? So Caleb Williams, of course, first quarterback taken in the 2024 NFL draft class based on his basic quarterback metrics. So this looks at era adjusted data from 1969 to 2024. Now, why am I looking at era adjusted data? Well, if you look at data from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the completion percentages are totally different. The offenses, how many yards they got on their offense in terms of passing yards, rushing yards, etc., are all different. The NFL changes significantly every 5 years or so. In fact, as they say, most people, their lives change every 6 months. Something is different about you every 6 months. So because of that, you have to do an error adjusted system to kind of look at the data from that perspective. And so basically, the data that you're looking at is looking at all of these quarterbacks based on basically a 10-year sample, from year 1 to year 10 from where they ended. So 2024, Caleb Williams is compared to all the quarterbacks from 2024 to 2015. And then all these other players are in the same sort of boat. So that could give you an idea of what this is looking at, to kind of look at, okay, how are they performing in the era in which they played? And for Caleb Williams, he didn't do so hot this year, based on that data. For a 23-year-old, and this is looking at all the 23-year-old quarterbacks in that time span, he had an 86.6 touchdown to interception ratio, which is good, but his completion percentage was 40 percentile. His yards per attempt was 22.6, which is low, very low yardage. His adjusted yards per attempt was 42. QBR 47. TQS was 47.92, which is about average. And then, of course, the win percentage was 16.12, which is a little bit disappointing, um, particularly in the second half. His point differential was 28.43, which is this is more of a team statistic, but just kind of gives you an idea on that. His strength of schedule was very high. He had 76.99 in terms of his level of competition. SRS looks at his team score, how strong was the team that he was on, which was kind of on the lower end. His OSRS, which is kind of where this is ranked to kind of show you, like Caleb Williams for a 23-year-old quarterback for how he performed, was probably one of the worst teams um, offensively speaking, in terms of how the team performed, which, a lot of people want to put a lot on the quarterback, but that just kind of gives you an idea. Like the offense was very bad that Caleb Williams was on. Whether he's responsible for that or not is in the eyes of the film watchers and everything else like that. And then, of course, you had the defensive data, which shows that he was on a team that did have a good defense. So the defensive ranking for the Bears, of course, was really good. Now, based on this data, the quarterback he most closely looked similar to was Gardner Minshew of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And probably Drew Lock would be the other sort of comparison. But again, that kind of just tells you kind of like how Caleb Williams started. He didn't start too hot. There's still more time for him to kind of show his ability in the future. But for a 23-year-old, for somebody who again, a lot of people saw as a generational prospect, a quarterback that a lot of people, and again, there was a lot of quarterbacks in this class that tested very similar to Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy were kind of neck and neck in many ways in terms of their data profiles. But for the most part, it was a little bit disappointing because, Caleb Williams is not 21 years old. He's not a very young quarterback because young quarterbacks typically struggle in their first years. This is a guy, more of a seasoned guy. He's 23. So you expect a little bit more out of him, but again, this is the 1 year. But that just kind of shows you how bad that 1 year was based on his overall data. It was pretty bad in terms of his first year. Now, when you get to additional quarterback statistics, this takes a look at other things like success percentage. So how often his passes went for first downs. It takes a look at sacks. It takes a look at sack percentage. Fourth quarter comebacks, game-winning drives, right? The juicy stuff that everybody likes to talk about. First down conversion rate, TD, touchdown slash interception ratio, TQS, and of course you look at the quarterback data after that. When you look at Caleb Williams based on this data, he was not too hot. Not too hot either. He kind of tested with guys like Derek Carr, Gardner Minshew, coming up again. But the biggest thing that really stuck out to me based on Caleb Williams was his sack percentage. He had probably the highest, or worst, I should say, sack percentage out of all the quarterbacks on this particular list, um, in terms of being in the sample that he was in. And that was one of the major criticisms of him in college was his sacks, taking sacks, unnecessary sacks. And that kind of played through to the NFL. So that is a big concern for him. Now, he did about the same as, say, C.J. Stroud. Stroud also took a lot of sacks as a rookie, but he still was able to perform despite the sacks. But that is definitely something that will need to improve in the future because, I mean, you can't take that many sacks. You just can't. And this is something where he was taking a lot of sacks in college, and now he's taking a lot of sacks in the NFL. And I'm sorry, guys, sacks are dead plays. Sacks are never good. So he really needs to improve in that particular area, especially getting completion. So this is definitely an area of concern. But this kind of shows you kind of how he's performed thus far based on his data here. Now, the last thing that we'll get to is advanced statistics. Advanced statistics is from Pro Football Reference, and it's referring to things such as batted throws, throwaways, spikes, drop percentage, bad throw percentage, on target percentage, how much time they had in the pocket, blitzes, hurries, hits, pressures. It also takes a look at air yards, yak, air yak, which is the combination of the two. Decision making, which takes a look at sort of like the on target percentage and the bad throw percentage, and also taking a look at pass pro, poise, and all those other sort of stuff, which I'll get to what those mean as we get through this. But based on Caleb Williams, based on his advanced statistics, if you just look at the columns on the right, so where air yards is at, yak, air yak, decisions, pass pro, and poise, taking a look at that area right there, um, brutal. The air yards not there, air yak not there, decision making, pass pro, whew, was actually a little better. So he had decent pass protection at the very least. Uh, he wasn't being blitzed a lot. He wasn't being hurried a lot. He wasn't taking a lot of hits, statistically speaking, again, based on data from 2018 to 2024. His pressures were 54, which are average, and yet his pressure percentage was very high. And again, pressure percentage is how often you're pressured per snap. And despite all that, he kind of made bad decisions despite really not having the worst pass protection ever. So that's a little bit of a concern. He was pressured, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't making the best decisions, despite really not being as pressured compared to other players. He wasn't facing as many blitzes. He wasn't being hurried as much as other players. He wasn't being hit as much as other players. He wasn't facing as many total pressures overall as other players. And yet he still didn't make the best decisions as a quarterback. And that's kind of what the poise takes a look at. It's taking a look at their decisions weighted with their pass protection. And quarterbacks that are making better decisions compared to the pass protection that they had, based on the blitzes they were facing and the hurries they were facing and all those sort of things. Those are the types of quarterbacks that you want to see do well. It's your ability to make plays despite the pressure. And Caleb Williams did not do well in that particular category. He was basically in line with guys like Sam Darnold, Gardner Minshew, Josh Allen, even, and of course Bryce Young and Justin Fields. So not a good start for him based on that particular area for him as a 23-year-old. Again, looking at the 23-year-olds here. So that is the biggest concern, really, is it's kind of a mixed bag with Caleb Williams. There were some positives to him, but there was a lot of negatives. It was a little bit disappointing, but that's kind of where it is with him. Conclusions. I would say Caleb Williams had a rough start to his NFL career. At this point, the best statistical comparison for him, the guy that kept coming up in every single chart, was Gardner Minshew. Lowering the sacks and making better decisions will be the keys to his success in 2024, but he really needs to have a strong year next year in his rookie season to really kind of make us forget about a lot of these different things. If he doesn't, this is not a good place to be. But typically it takes about 3 years for quarterbacks to really break out in the NFL. But when you're 23 years old, you expect them to be a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more ready to take the reins and really go out there and do it. And he didn't really do that. So that's definitely a bit of a disappointment for him, considering somebody who did test really well based on his overall data profile. Then we get to next guy, which of course is J.J. McCarthy. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we don't have a lot of data for him. But J.J. McCarthy started the season on IR, and the emergence of Sam Darnold is a concern in the future. However, this is exactly the type of situation that he can learn and become a starter in the future. This is another wait and see examination of McCarthy. So in terms of J.J. McCarthy, he hasn't really done enough on paper to really say much about him in the future. He was probably going to struggle regardless because most 21-year-olds struggle when they enter the NFL. When you're 21, 22 years old and you're a quarterback and you're starting in the NFL, a lot of them don't really do that well. They don't do that hot when they're starting the NFL. So usually it takes until like they're 23, 24, 25 even to really kind of get into a good mode of doing well. And then they do fantastic. They take their lumps and they keep going. With JJ McCarthy, still an open bag, so not enough data to really say much about him, so we can kind of move on from him because we don't really know much about him because it hasn't much really happened with him thus far. Next up, we get to Drake May. So Drake May, of course, another quarterback taken early on, and data really liked him. He was somebody who, based on his basic NFL metrics, did do so hot, kind of like Caleb Williams. He was on probably the worst based on the area that he tested, based on his TQS, which is total quarterback score. taking a sample from that, he was probably on the worst offensive team compared to all the other players in the sample. His completion percentage was good. He has 72.8 out of 100 in terms of completion percentage. His other areas were all below average. So his yards per attempt, his adjusted yards per attempt, his QBR was average. His TQS was 31.31 out of 100. Total quarterback score, taking a look at sort of everything. And his touchdown to interception ratio was 44.7. Based on this data, he kind of tested in line with guys like Bernie Kosar, Marcus Mariota, and those types of players for the most part. It's kind of where he would kind of sit right now. Again, didn't perform like Patrick Mahomes did, Drew Bledsoe, Tua from Miami, or Peyton Manning even. In terms of his first year. So we'll see what happens, but that definitely is what his basic NFL metrics kind of look like compared to all the quarterbacks that have been in the NFL since 1969. Then you get to his additional quarterback statistics. Based on this data, he did a little bit better. His success percentage was about close to average in terms of his ability to make first downs. He didn't take a lot of sacks in terms of total sacks and yards. He did have a bad sack percentage in terms of how often things led to sacks on a percentage basis. His fourth quarter comebacks were terrible. His game-winning drives were terrible. But again, it was not that great. He did have a good season this year, and the Patriots didn't either. And then, of course, you look at first down completion percentage, not that great. TD slash interception ratio, not that great. TQS, not that great. Overall, again, testing with similar number of names: Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater. Those types of players are kind of the names that keep coming up in terms of where he was at. And then when we get to advanced statistics for him, based on his advanced statistics, Drake May actually did a little bit better than other players. He kind of tested within Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Daniel Jones in terms of his poise ability based on his data. Which again, poise, takes into account, their ability to make plays despite facing a lot of pressure. And Drake May actually had pretty decent pass protection in terms of this basically. He didn't have a lot of blitzes compared to other players. Didn't have a lot of hurries. Didn't have a lot of hits. Didn't have a lot of pressures, and the pressure percentage was also not the worst thing ever. So his pass protection was relatively decent based on what he had there. So, maybe it was the offensive skill players that are kind of maybe an issue there. Um, but again, Drake May is another guy where you're going to have to wait and see in terms of how he does. So, Drake May has some positives in terms of completion percentage and his decisions while facing a lot of pass protection issues. But is another prospect where it can take some time before we can fully roll out him as a starter. So I think next year again is another year where we'll want to see that jump. We don't want to see a sophomore slump. The offense was terrible. He came in and did the best that he could, but we'll probably need another year to really see what becomes of him. Next slide. And then we get to Jaden Daniels. I know a lot of you guys, and the reason why I prompted this video, there was a comment in one of my previous videos where they were talking about, Jaden Daniels looks like an outlier, or Jaden Daniels looks like he's not exactly fitting with the data. But actually, Jaden Daniels kind of did pretty well for what his data said about him. So, first off, basic NFL metrics for Jaden Daniels. He did really well. Tested with guys like Randall Cunningham, of course, Pat Hayden, Eric Hipple, Jalen Hurts, even Dan Marino is on here, though Dan Marino was a rookie in 1984. Well, not 1984, but Dan Marino was he was a little bit more seasoned before the 1985 season, where he did a lot of really good things. Probably his third year. That was his third year for Dan Marino, I believe. Yeah. And then, of course, with Jaden Daniels, he did well in terms of his metrics. I think the areas where he was a little bit lower on was like yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, were a little bit of a concern. Strength of schedule, he faced a very, very light strength of schedule. It was not the best strength of schedule, I would say, in terms of facing really tough teams. This is based on his data again, um, his team data. But overall, did really well. Um, Offense, fantastic. I think he was a big reason for that. The defense of the Washington Commanders is not that great. probably below average for them. But overall, Jaden Daniels has done really well based on his basic NFL metrics. When you get to his additional quarterback statistics here, he did well too. Tested with guys like Russell Wilson, Drew Bledsoe, Jalen Hurts again. He's coming up again based on his data. His sack percentage is, of course, a little bit of a concern. He's kind of in line with guys like Jalen Hurts and Russell Wilson in terms of that particular area, or Deshaun Watson as well for that, but did well in terms of everything else. His success percentage was above average, in terms of getting first downs per completion and different downs and distances. And then, of course, you have the first down completion percentage was good, TD percentage. All that stuff is fantastic. So based on his data, he did well. He wasn't like the best rookie ever. He wasn't like, a Brock Purdy. Again, I'm not trying to call him the best rookie ever, but he wasn't like other 24-year-old quarterbacks like Josh Allen, Peyton Manning, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff in terms of his data. But he did well. He was kind of in that mid-tier area of success, and that's what you want to see. That's what you want to see. So, did well in terms of those statistics. And then the other thing to look at is his advanced statistics, which is where there was some positives here as well. Jaden Daniels did well in terms of his bad throw percentage and on target percentage. Those were really good areas for him. 76 out of 100, 74 out of 100 in terms of those particular areas. And then, of course, when you look at his pass protection was actually decent this year as well. Decisions were decent. His poise ranking, which again, poise takes a look at how well you made decisions for the pass protection that you had. That particular area, he was about average for that, which again, nothing wrong with that, but just average, not really like above average, but average. Good area for him right there. And then, of course, in terms of if you look at plays and yards, so if you go to past the pressure percentage, you got scrimmage, yards per scrimmage, and you have plays and yards. Really good in terms of getting yards with his feet. I think that's a positive for him, and very similar to Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, in terms of his ability to make plays like that. Of course, Lamar Jackson's at the very bottom of the screen, but very good in terms of being a dual threat quarterback and making plays with his legs, and also doing well in terms of the passing game. So those are all positives for him, which I think really make him stick out statistically speaking. So Jaden Daniels, solid NFL rookie debut. Again, exactly kind of what you want to see, especially for a 24-year-old, because again, when you're 24 years old, you really need to stick out. You really need to get the ball rolling, and he did that. So that's a big positive for him. Conclusions. Jaden Daniels did exactly what a 24-year-old rookie needs to do by having early success in his NFL career. Archetypes for Daniels would be like Randall Cunningham, Deshaun Watson, and Jalen Hurts. So he's kind of in a similar tier as those types of players in terms of his ability as a rusher and as a passer. And he is well on his way to meet his expectations as a multiple Pro Bowl caliber quarterback going forward. So again, his data had him as a multiple Pro Bowl type quarterback. That was sort of his ultimate upside based on his data. Um, is Jay Daniels going to become a Hall of Fame quarterback? Based on his data, probably not. But again, that's sort of that's way in the distance. That's way in the distance. So, and I think a lot of times when people look at data stuff, they don't understand that there's different levels of good. There's different levels of fantastic. And I think in terms of Jalen Hurts, not Jalen Hurts, excuse me, Jaden Daniels, he did really well this year. As a rookie, probably the best quarterback this year in terms of how he performed based on all the quarterbacks, in terms of his ability to win games, and also just being able to be that guy where you watch him on film, you're like, wow, he's fantastic. But again, we need more time to really make a definite answer on him. Other quarterbacks in this particular draft class could make improvements and could become that guy in the future. But as far as year one, really doing it really well, year one, Jane Daniels was that guy. I was asked one time on Twitter, they asked me, which quarterback should I go with in this rookie draft in terms of who's the guy that's going to make the impact first out of everybody. And I told him Jaden Daniels. I think in terms of his rushing ability and his ability to do well in terms of throwing the football, he probably was going to be the one that really have success early on, whereas guys like Caleb Williams and J.D. McCarthy and other guys like that, or Jake May, were probably going to take some time to really develop before they really get there. So that's my general thoughts on him. And again, fantastic player, and I'm excited to see what happens in the future. Then we get to Bo Nix. Bo Nix, of course, is somebody who, based on his basic NFL metrics, did well. He kind of tested. This is funny. This is something where I kind of didn't really see coming 100%. I kind of did, but most quarterbacks that tested like Bo Nix in terms of his area as a starter in the first round, drafted high, was guys like Matt Ryan and Bo Nix, not Matt Ryan and Derek Carr. Derek Carr, of course, was drafted sort of in the second round, but these are sort of the quarterbacks that really kind of met with Bo Nix, and he tested very similar to them in terms of his data. I think he did better in terms of completion percentage compared to Matt Ryan and Derek Carr as a 24-year-old. But they're very similar in terms of yards per attempt and adjusted yards per attempt. Very short passes. Everything's really yak based type approach to things, and that's kind of how it bore out. That's really how it bore out for him. So again, based on NFL metrics, Bo Nix did well. There is some concern in terms of his yards per attempt and adjusted yards per attempt data, but again, did well, won football games, and of course the Denver Broncos are doing well this year. So that's a good start for Bo Nix. Now, when you get to his additional quarterback statistics, this is where there's a little bit of a concern, and this puts him more so again with a Derek Carr, because when you look at him as a 24-year-old, his success percentage in terms of his plays becoming first downs, that low yards per attempt really kind of hurts him because his success percentage is 25.80 out of 100 in terms of his passes leading to first downs on first down, second down, third down. Just as Derek Carr also had that issue. Now, sacks are not the biggest issue for Bo Nix. He didn't really have a whole lot of sack issues. The sack percentage on the Broncos was very low. So he had a lot of protection. He had a lot of things to go positive for him. But his first down percentage was 8.67 out of 100, which is not the best. And there's still time for this to develop because I think the Broncos this year, the first half of the season, Bo Nix and the offense was kind of they were kind of struggling, and then they really started to get a groove and really do better as the year went on. And I think, if you actually looked at the better part of the season, he probably did better than these numbers would suggest. But that is the general sort of concern for him, is the success percentage and the first time percentage for him, which is takes us to advanced statistics for Bo Nix. And based on his advanced statistics, Bo Nix, did well in terms of a lot of different things. His bad throw percentage wasn't that terrible. His on-target percentage was about 53 out of 100, which is average. Those are exactly the types of numbers that you want to see. Of course, his pass protection was pretty decent, as I mentioned before. His sack percentage, etc., wasn't that bad. Um, pressure percentage was 94 out of 100, which is fantastic, which means most of his passes or most of his snaps, he didn't face a lot of pressure and made good decisions, but his decisions were not great compared to the fact that he didn't face a lot of pressure. When you look at his air yards here, Bo Nix had 13 out of 100 in terms of his air yards on offense, which is a little bit concerned. And then everything was yak, 81 out of 100 in terms of yak. So, not very, didn't really push the ball down the football field a lot. Really short passes, and those short passes did lead to a lot of first downs, which makes sense. If all of your offensive production through the air is through yak, you're probably going to struggle a little bit to get first downs in situations where you can't get it through yak. There's a limitation to just being yak only. You have to have some air yards. The ball has to travel a little bit further than just 5-6 yards, or 10 yards down the football field, or even 15 sometimes. So that's definitely something to kind of look at and monitor with Bo Nix. But again, decent numbers for him in terms of all of his data, and we'll kind of see what happens going forward with him. But Bo Nix didn't have a terrible start. Again, he's testing with guys like Matt Ryan and Derek Carr, which are not bad places to be, but not necessarily somebody that I think is going to end up in the Hall of Fame or anything like that. But we'll see where he goes with his development. So overall, Bo Nix is a mixed bag as a rookie. There are positives in terms of his completion percentage and TD slash interception ratio, but negatives in terms of air yards and his first down success percentage. And Nix is very similar. Derek Carr slash Matt Ryan with better yak receivers as a rookie. That's a starting NFL quarterback, but it's in line with the highest upside he had based on his data projection. You can build a franchise around Bo Nix and have a lot of starts, kind of like with Matt Ryan, kind of like with Derek Carr. You can sell jerseys, for to a certain extent of him. But is he gonna be that guy to really take you to a Super Bowl championship? Is he that player that is going to transcend the NFL? Is he the guy that is going to, after 3 or 4 years, you don't get tired of it, or maybe not, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe somewhere around there? Is he the guy that, when the going gets tough, you're not gonna throw him out uh, into the wolves? Probably not. So that's the only general concern with Bo Nix is based on his data. He tested like somebody who most likely was not going to be successful. He is successful. So that means that, okay, this is a guy who's successful, but what does that mean? He's not exactly Brett Favre, because Brett Favre didn't have the best data coming out and was fantastic. And yeah, so I don't spend too much time on this. I'm not trying to rant or anything, but that's just the general feelings based on the data that Bo Nix kind of gives off from his rookie season and based on his pre-draft profile for him. Yep. Now, let's get to Michael Penix Jr. So, Michael Penix didn't have a lot of quarterback data to really work with this year. He only was in about 3 games in terms of significant play this year. His TD percentage wasn't that great, so 27.6. Completion percentage was 13.6. Yards per attempt 64, 45.5 in terms of adjusted yards per attempt. QBR 25.4, and then TQS was 26.32. Now, based on this data, tested with guys like Steve McNair, Andy Dalton, Gus Frerotte, Jim Plunkett, Vince Young, those types of players. So that's kind of how his start was as a 24-year-old. In terms of his starts here. Uh, Again, not a whole lot of data really say much. I wouldn't even really put much credence into this data again because all these other players had significantly more starts than him based on his data. But this is just a generalized view of him based on how he performed in the limited time that he played. Um, Other conclusions, there wasn't enough data to really look at him from advanced statistical data. There also wasn't enough data to really look at him in terms of the other, the additional statistical stuff. But Michael Penix Jr., did not have enough data to do a full profile, but what data he had presented was not the best. A full offseason with Penix as a starter should give us insight into what he could be in the future. However, there's not enough data to give a projection at this time. So Penix Jr. is a guy where he really needs to show he can be the guy as a 25-year-old next year. Because if he doesn't, if he needs more development, that's just not something you really need to invest in long term. So again, Michael Penix did not do spectacularly um, as a rookie. He did have Kirk Cousins in front of him, but we will need more time to kind of see what happens with him to kind of make a determination in terms of what he is in the future. And there wasn't enough snaps done to really make the determination. Next up, we get to Spencer Rattler. This is another one that's going to be short. So Spencer Rattler, basic NFL metrics for him, all below average. His TD, touchdown slash interception ratio, completion percentage, yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, QBR, TQS, and win percentage were all in the dumps. Not a good place to be. Tested with Dan Pastorini, tested with Kyle Trask, Joey Harrington, those types of players. If not worse than those players. Nathan Peterman, all those guys is kind of where he's at. Now, based on advanced statistics, because he did play a little bit more than Michael Penix Jr. Based on this data here, he did okay. His on-target percentage was better. His poise was a little bit better, but he wasn't quite with guys like Will Levis, Mason Rudolph, Sam Darnold, Joe Burrow, or Zach Wilson in terms of being 24-year-olds at the position. He more so was in like with David Blau in terms of his ability there. So, Spencer Rattler had average pass protection, had made slightly above average decisions with the football, but wasn't really getting it done in terms of air yards, air yak, or any of those types of things, and as a result, really struggled. So that's kind of where Spencer Rattler is at. I would say, Spencer Rattler did not perform well with the limited amount of starts he had. Rattler has above average accuracy, but his overall profile is a mess. I would give Rattler one more year, and if he does not drastically improve, then it's time to move on for him. It really is, considering his age and everything else like that. So, again, we'll see what happens, but that's just the general sort of concern with him. Overall, final conclusions. Final conclusions, guys. I would say this. The NFL draft data is and always has been a long-term projection. Everybody wants to have that gotcha moment. Gotcha, Jim. Gotcha, Jim. Your data said this, and this is what happened. Again, NFL draft data is a long-term projection. I'll have players that tested really well based on my data, and I have them ranked sort of as second or third on there, and everybody thinks I'm crazy. And then 3 years down the line, that guy is leading their team in sacks or is leading their offense in terms of rushing or receiving. So you kind of have to take your time with data. Data is not a um, instant instant thing. It's long term. And there's other things you can't predict. You can't predict development, 100%. You can't predict the coaches they're going to have. You can't predict, the sort of dysfunction that these other teams have. But that's just the basic thing. It's a long term projection, so you have to evaluate it 3, 4 years down the line. You can't just do it right away. But you can kind of look at, okay, how they did in their first year to kind of see what track they're on right now. And I would say what's clear from the 2024 data is that the more seasoned and older prospects like Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix found faster success. I understand that people hated the age arguments about Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels, and people were just, oh my gosh, I'm tired of hearing about how old they are. Oh my God. Why does it matter about age? And I'm with you. I'm with you. I really am. Because again, age is not necessarily the biggest deal in the world. If you do well in terms of your college performances, and Bo Nix did well in college, as did Jaden Daniels. So, you can't, and also Michael Penix Jr. So you can't like look at age and go, that's end all be all type of thing. You're gonna have success with a player that's older. Is all I'm trying to say. But you're not gonna hit that tippity top of the success continuum. There's gonna be a limit to their upside when you have a guy who's that age. And I think in terms of, they're going to be more seasoned, there's going to be more of a high floor with them, but the ceiling may not be as high when you take a guy that's a little bit older. And we'll see what happens to Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix in the future to kind of look at that, but that's just the general feelings about it. Kalen Williams, of course, was a letdown considering that he's not exactly a 21-year-old rookie. So that's definitely one takeaway that I would say is like a final conclusion for that. JJ McCarthy, Drake May, due to his age, and Michael Penix Jr. are more wait and see. Drake May is younger. He's 22 years old, and due to that, you kind of have to give him a little bit more time to develop. Again, when quarterbacks enter and start at 21, 22 years old, most of them struggle, if not are terrible, in terms of their first 2 seasons, or first season especially. So you can't really judge them that harshly. But 23-year-old, 24-year-old quarterbacks, you're going to see more percentage of those players having success in their first year compared to guys like guys that are younger. So we need more time to really rule out those guys, but that's just where it is. Uh, while Spencer Rattler is almost someone you should move on from. I think Spencer Rattler, based on his data and how poorly he performed, you can give him one more year, but he's a guy I think that the fuse needs to be a little bit shorter on him before you really decide to move on. And then I would say this also, Daniels should prove to be a quarterback in the vein of guys like Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, those types of players, sort of a dual threat quarterback in the future if we're talking fantasy football. And then, of course, Knicks would be more in the category of like a Matt Ryan / Derek Carr, where if they have a good supporting cast, if they have great wide receivers around them, then they're going to be able to get a lot of yak, which is going to help them out. But they're never going to be like a ridiculous game-changing quarterback, and in many ways they may not even win a Super Bowl because of their limitations to a certain extent. So But that's the general feelings. That's the review of the 2024 NFL Draft quarterback class. If you like this video, if you want to see more videos like this, definitely like this video, share it, leave a comment below. Do all that stuff. It really helps the channel out a lot. And if you like more videos like this that are more long form, give me some suggestions in the comment section below. What other videos would you like to see that are more longer form videos like this? Or if you want them to be shortened up, if you thought it was too long, definitely give me that comment as well. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.